My name is Mary Davies. I'm Professor of Labour History at Royal Holloway University of London, and I've been an active trade unionist all my life, and I'm very pleased to be here to interview two people who are active in the Spy Cops campaign. Lois Austin, who is a core participant in the public inquiry into undercover policing, and Dave Smith, who is Secretary of the Blacklist Support Group. I personally got involved or interested in this campaign really through Dave Smith, who I've known for a long time and have known about what's happened to blacklisted building workers. And in fact, Dave Smith has written a book about this called Blacklist, and I was very privileged to to recommend it, and on the cover, I believe. Anyway, first of all, over to Lois. Lois, how did you get involved in this campaign?
Well, I found out that I had been spied on by an officer in the Special Demonstrations Squad. I think, was it 2011, 2012 when the story broke?
Yeah, sound like.
And it was Peter Francis, the whistleblower, who was actually my spy. And he made the revelations to Guardian journalists, and they phoned me up and said, Lois, do you know you were spied on for about 5 years by Peter Francis? And it was while I was involved in leading an organisation called Youth Against Racism in Europe. We was organising the big demonstrations in Welling against the British National Party headquarters in the 90s, in the early and mid-90s, and then the big campaign around Brick Lane to drive the British National Party from Brick Lane. And Peter Francis was instructed to infiltrate Youth Against Racism in Europe, to set up a special branch file on me and another core participant called Hannah Sell. And apparently he says that there was an MI5 file on me and Hannah, but there wasn't a special branch file. So his brief was to get a special branch file on me, Hannah. And then it turned out that he got about 30 special branch files set up on other activists. I think he also spied on you, Dave, and some others, because Dave was active with us at the time campaigning against the British National Party.
Thanks very much, Lois. Dave, I want to ask you now how you got involved in this campaign.
I got involved in the campaign from a slightly different angle. I worked in the construction industry, and I was a union activist in the construction industry, campaigning about unpaid wages, but especially about safety on building sites, because in the 1990s about 3 building workers were dying every week, and the union organised big campaigns about health and safety. And what we found out after many, many years of campaigning was that the big construction companies were keeping secret files on anyone who campaigned about health and safety and complained about unpaid wages or became a shop steward or a safety rep. And these files were used to blacklist workers, or mainly union activists, and stop them getting work. So in the middle of a building boom, when everyone was earning good money, if you'd been complaining about asbestos or overflowing toilets or the state of the scaffolding, basically you couldn't get a job. And, we defaulted on our mortgage a lot of the times. And it sounds like a conspiracy theory until 2009, when a government department, the Information Commissioner's Office, did a raid and found all these files that were kept on us. And when we saw the files, a lot of the information obviously comes from big multinational companies like Sir Robert McAlpine, Balfour Beatty, Carillion, people like that. But also some of the information comes from the police, because as well as being spied on by the companies, we've now found out that these same undercover police officers were also spying on union activists campaigning about health and safety.
I'd like you both now to say something about the campaign and the impact that the campaign has had on both of your areas of work. You, for example, on the issue of racism, and Dave, the impact of it really on the trade union movement. Can you say something about that? First of all, Lois.
Well, I think the campaign's had a massive impact because, like Dave said, in the past, when we raised stuff around socialists, trade unionists, anti-racist campaigners, social justice campaigners being spied on, or there being police agent provocateurs on our demonstrations, then people laughed at us. People thought that we were mad conspiracy theorists. So when Peter Francis whistle blew, that was a really, really important moment, really, for the whole of the Labour movement and all the associated campaigns, because it proved what we had said was right, that our movement had been infiltrated, that we had been spied on, that there was attempts by the British state. I mean, we're supposed to live, after all, in a democratic society, but there were attempts by the British state to infiltrate, spy and to subvert democratic organisations. So it had a big campaign in that sense, in that we've been able to bring it out into the open, shine a great big light onto the murky world, the degenerate world really, of police spies and all the nasty stuff that they got up to, the terrible revelations about, I mean, it's made me get all goosepimply and angry just talking about it, the stuff that we now know that they infiltrated the lives and had intimate relationships with women activists from our movement. We know, for example, that they spied on the Lawrence family. So while the police, people like Peter Francis and others, while they were supposed to be out hunting Stephen Lawrence's killers, they were actually spying on the Lawrence family and their supporters. I mean, just think about that for a moment. It's absolutely outrageous. It's the police, it's a public body being used in that way. And, Dave may go on to say it, but some of the blacklisted workers, they had files set up on those by the private blacklisting companies, because police spies gave their names and their details to the private blacklisting companies because of the anti-racist activity they'd been involved in. So there's direct collusion there between the police, public body, and the private blacklisting companies. So it's had a big impact, actually. And what it's done is it's brought us all together. Lots of activists from different. I'm a member of the Socialist Party. We've got other activists and members of different organisations, environmental groups, anarchist groups, trade unions. It's brought us all together. We've got a lot of unity here, where we've worked together to build campaigns, the Police Spies Out of Lives campaign, the campaign opposing police surveillance, the Blacklist Support Group. We've come together as a sort of broad, united front type organisation to campaign against police spies, surveillance in our movement, and all the terrible things that they've done. And actually our first demand was a public inquiry, and we won that. There's lots of problems with the public inquiry, which we can go on to talk about, but nevertheless, the public inquiry in itself has brought it all out into the open, and that was an important victory for us.
Yeah, I'd really just want to a certain extent, reiterate what Lois said, because the big thing with me is, when even myself, if people 10 or 15 years ago had told me that individual union branches were being infiltrated by undercover police officers, I'd look at you as if to say, what are you talking about? I mean, even I would think that was a conspiracy theory. But not because this has all now been confirmed by the Metropolitan Police. They've given us the information. My lawyer is Imran Khan, who is the same lawyer who's representing Doreen Lawrence. And we put in a complaint about 7 or 8 years ago, arguing that the police were giving information to the blacklist files that was, undercover police officers were spying on us and giving information to the blacklist files that was keeping us out of work. And when we first put it in, people looked at us, even then, like we were, I remember telling MPs about it, and they were just looking at us like, yeah, we'll believe you to a point, but this stuff is just, this is like science fiction. It's just not real. And 6 years later, the Metropolitan Police sent us a report, 70-page report, which basically confirmed it. I think the opening line was the allegation that the police supplied information to the Blacklist, the Economic League, which was the Blacklist that was set up in 1919, went through to the early 1990s, and the Consulting Association, which was the one that the construction companies used from 1990s up until 2009, they literally say, that is proven. They've looked into it and it's proven, and they give us chapter and verse of where it happened. And looking back at the time, did I think I was being spied on by undercover police officers? No, because I didn't think what we were doing was important enough. We were campaigning about health and safety. We were campaigning about unpaid wages. There's lots of campaigns about health and safety in the building industry. One of them was called the Building Workers Safety Campaign. And I remember a union activist at the time I was on picket lines with him, I went to conferences with him, I went to meetings with him, and he was the chair of the Building Workers Safety Campaign. He wrote letters on behalf of the Building Workers Safety Campaign to various different union branches across London and to organisations, the Safety Campaign Hazards, the organisation Inquest that supports deaths in police custody, that kind of thing. And when I knew this person, he was a member of Hackney branch of UCAT. He was a joiner, and I knew him, and his name was Mark Cassidy when I knew him back in the 1990s. And actually, 15 years later, we found out his name's Mark Jenner, and he wasn't a carpenter at all. He was an undercover police officer sent in to spy on what? On people campaigning against racism, on people campaigning for health and safety on building sites. And exactly as Lois said, the thing for me is the fact that nowadays when we go and say this at conferences, nowadays when we go and talk to trade unionists about it, people don't think it's a conspiracy theory anymore. And it is this John McDonnell, who was a founder member of the Blacklist Support Group when we set up the campaign many years ago. He often says, the reason we do this is because when you first tell people about it, their initial reaction is things like that don't happen here. And what we've done, I think, by constantly exposing it, constantly going back and talking about it, is made it so people actually think, well, actually, things like that do happen here. I remember I went out to Hong Kong a few years ago and spoke to some trade unionists in Hong Kong and showed them all about the police infiltration of trade unions at the time, and I remember having the conversation saying that when I tell people in Britain this, everyone's really surprised, and the people in Hong Kong laughed at me. The trade unionists in Hong Kong laughed at me and said, of course Britain do it. They were an imperialist, colonialist power. Of course they infiltrated the trade unions. Of course they infiltrated sort of anyone who was trying to sort of challenge the status quo. They did it in this country, in Hong Kong. Don't you think they did it, all around the world? Well, they did it in their own country as well, and they're still doing it today. The special demonstration squad that Lois talked about might have been closed down, but the police officers are doing the same thing, have just been moved into a different police unit. It's now called SO15. It's based in the Metropolitan Police. SO15 is Counter-Terrorism Command. And so spying on trade unionists, spying on CND, spying on, left-wing journalists and sort of anti-racist campaigning is now considered to be counter-terrorism. This is just authoritarianism gone to its extreme, and it's dangerous in today's world with the sort of right-wing sort of jingoism, with that sort of nationalism that's sweeping not just across Europe but across the world. It's dangerous. The biggest threat to democracy in this country is not from the left. The biggest threat from democracy in this country is from the right, the sort of the boot boys who turn up for Tommy Robinson on the street, but also the sort of the nationalist jingoism from politicians, but also the secret state. The secret state who are there to suppress anyone who challenges authority and challenges the status quo.
Well, I mean, that point about the secret state that Dave raised is really important, because throughout this campaign, we've said we're not talking about a few bad apples here, Peter Francis and others that sort of overstep their brief and, they shouldn't have had relationships with women, or what the hell were they doing on demonstrations and being agent provocateurs or giving names of blacklisted workers to, the blacklisting companies. We don't believe it is a few bad apples. We think that there is what we want to do is probe very deeply into the secret state, and that's what we want the public inquiry to do. One of our demands is who gave the orders. I do not believe that the tops in the Metropolitan Police, the Home Secretaries at the time, did not know about the activities of the Special Demonstration Squad and then the secret political policing units which existed before that and the ones that exist today. I think that they do know about it. And, for example, we had Jack Straw, Labour Home Secretary, while the SDS was in operation. So what did Jack Straw know? And if Jack Straw knew about it, what did he do about it? We really want to probe deeply here about the fact that this is political policing, not just a few bad apples. We believe that this was part of the strategy, the overall strategy of the state, and part of their response to trying to keep and oppress the labour movement and working class organisation. I mean, Gareth Peirce made a very good point at one of our campaign opposing police surveillance meetings, where she said, of course this is political policing. The British state had a 30-year strategy to destroy the National Union of Mine Workers, and they succeeded. Largely, they succeeded. And we know as well that the NUM was heavily infiltrated by police spies and probably by the Secret Service as well. And Gareth Peirce is the lawyer acting on behalf of the NUM in the public inquiry into undercover policing. So we want to probe deeply about what went on. We know, because of the cover stories of all of the police that had intimate relationships with women, the cover stories were all the same. So we know that they had a strategy. They were following a formula of the way they would infiltrate, the way they would use women, and the way they would infiltrate our movement. And we believe it's the same for the trade unionists that they spied on, and for the socialist organisations, environmental campaigns, all of them, and the women and the women's organisations. So, so for us, it's about political policing, and it's about the British state and what they feel it's acceptable to do. I mean, the other thing is we know they spied on MPs. I mean, at what point was it okay for the police, who were supposed to enforce the law, to spy on the lawmakers? We know that Jeremy Corbyn was spied on. We know that Dave Nellist, who was an MP in the 1980s, was spied on. He's a core participant in the public inquiry. Other MPs on the left, Peter Hain, for God's sake, was spied on. His right-hand man in the anti-apartheid movement was actually a police spy. His deputy was a police spy. So at what point did it become okay to spy on MPs? So there's a lot of questions need to be asked about the role of the state in our society. This is supposed to be a democracy. As far as we were concerned, I mean, I was very young when I was spied on. We were campaigning against the British National Party in South East London, and terrible, terrible atrocities, racist murders in that area. As my mother-in-law says, we were on the side of the angels, and yet I was spied on. There's a big fat police file on me for those activities. Why? And who's giving the orders?
Well, you've obviously been very successful in bringing this into the public domain, but I wonder how much and whether you want to build much more public support for the campaign. I know you've got the Mitting inquiry. Would you like to say a little bit more about where you go from here? First of all, Dave.
Yeah, the Mitting public inquiry into undercover policing was set up about 4 years ago now. What's really amazing is I do this speech all the time to various, sometimes a group of students, sometimes to trade union groups, and when I ask them who's heard of the public inquiry into undercover policing, virtually no one ever puts their hand up, because everyone's heard of the public inquiry into Grenfell and everyone's heard of the public inquiry into child sex abuse, but the one to do with undercover policing barely gets a mention in the press. It's literally, I did a speech a while back to about 200 or 300 students up in Glasgow, and at the end of it asked them who'd heard of it, and about 3 people out of 200 or 300 of them put their hand up. That's the thing that we found really weird, and within 4 years they still haven't had a single piece of evidence heard. No witnesses have come forward and been heard in the public inquiry at all. It really just looks like the ball's been kicked into the long grass to be a bit of an establishment cover-up, if we're honest. What we're trying to do, what we're very much trying to do, is get this mainstreamed. So it becomes, you want this in the public domain. You want everybody to hear about it. You want people to know about it. And Lois talked about the National Union of Miners being spied on. And one of the things that we're quite proud of is when they decided to set up the public inquiry, we pushed and pushed and pushed and asked for there to be what they call union strand in the public inquiry, so that the public inquiry won't just randomly look at what the undercover police officers are up to. There's a specific strand in it that looks about the infiltration of trade unions. And the National Union of Mine Workers, the Fire Brigades Union and Unite have all been given core participant status because the Metropolitan Police have already admitted that those unions were infiltrated. The Blacklist Support Group that we set up after the revelations about blacklisting was exposed in 2009, we've been given public core participant status, as have about 10 individual construction workers who, as I say many times, I'm a trade unionist, I'm not a terrorist. I'm campaigning for better pay, better conditions, better health and safety. I'm not going around shooting people, and there's always been undercover police who at a demonstration would just put a hoodie on and a pair of trainers and a pair of jeans and walk around amongst the crowd and look, gather intelligence. Of course, that's always going to happen. But we're not talking about this. What we're talking about is people who are given new identities, given new passports, given new national insurance numbers, back stories, completely made up, having long-term infiltration of democratic organisations, and it's subverting democracy. This is taxpayers' money going on subverting democracy, and that shouldn't be happening. That's what we want to expose, because, as Lois said, this is political policing, and the political police, of all of the ones we know, virtually all of them are spying on the left. Virtually all of them are spying. We look at the organisations that they're infiltrating. It's anti-apartheid, it's the anti-Nazi League, it's Youth Against Racism, it's trade unions. It's the Labour Party, the Communist Party. They're the people who are being infiltrated. Not, barely any of the far right are being infiltrated. This demonstrates where what the mindset of the people at the top are where they actually see the threat. They see anyone who's progressive, anyone on the left, as a threat to the status quo. So because I'm an ex-building worker, one of the big campaigns that we were involved in is known as the Shrewsbury Pickets. In 1972, there was a national building workers strike, and after the strike finished, the police arrested a number of union activists, and they were sent to prison because of picketing. Not because of any, none of them were accused of violence. What it was known as conspiracy. Because they'd organised pickets, they were sent to prison, and two of the people who were sent to prison, Ricky Tomlinson and who is now a famous actor now, and Des Warren, went to prison for 3 years, Des Warren. And the unions have always said that this was a miscarriage of justice, and we've been campaigning to get the files for the case released under the 30-year rule, and that was back in 1972, the strike, and lo and behold, the files have still not been released to this day, and all of the Home Secretaries all the way through have said that they can't release the files because of national security reasons. Well, apparently it was just a couple of building workers and union activists organising pickets. But what the researchers appear to have found out is that, once again, those workers were infiltrated by the secret state as well, and the conspiracy is true. But even to this day, the police refuse to provide the information to us.
And Ricky Tomlinson should be a core participant in the Mitting inquiry, and they've refused him core participant status. And there's a part of this campaign is to get Ricky core participant status and to probe what went on in terms of the Shrewsbury pickets and the fact that he was put behind bars and everything else.
Well, just coming back once again to this question of where you go from here. As you said, the Mitting probably isn't going to go very far. It is a cover-up. What I'd like to know is how you get this out into the public domain. What is the campaign aims in the sense that you've got this assembled voice of all those people who've been spied on from all different walks of life? How do we get people to understand what the secret state has been up to? Can you tell us, please, how do you think that the role of the secret state, in the way that you've described it, can be publicised so that there is public awareness of what the state has been up to in our name and at our expense? Where's the campaign going to go from here?
Okay, well, one of the things we're doing right now, in a few weeks' time, is we're holding a trade union conference. Which is oversubscribed, actually. It's been oversubscribed twice, where it's gone. We're attempting to take this right into the trade union movement. If you think, I think it's 6 million workers in Britain are members of trade unions. So that's 6.5 million are members of trade unions. So that's already a mass audience for this campaign.
And let me dive in here. Coming back to this thing about people used to look at this as like some weird fringe issue that, but a couple of years ago, the Trade Union Congress at their national, Congress seat in Brighton passed a motion about undercover policing on trade unions. If we'd had a conference 10 years ago about undercover police spying on trade unions, no one would have turned up. Now we've got general secretaries and assistant general secretaries of trade, major trade unions turning up. We've got the TUC has got a national policy about police infiltration of trade unions. So yes, I think we have moved mountains in order to get even this far. But I think you're absolutely right. It's about how we get it out even more. And I think the Mitting inquiry is set to try and frustrate us as much as we can. But personally, my involvement in that inquiry is about trying to shake the tree and see what falls out. We don't know what's going to happen. But the more we probe into it, the more our QCs, hopefully will be given some evidence to look at where we can actually go in and ask these undercover police officers, ask their managers, ask maybe the politicians who are actually directing this, what their premise was for this. The more we can get it exposed. And there's a reason that they don't want to expose it. Let's be honest. There's a reason they don't want to expose it. It's because what we're actually shining a light on is labour versus capital. This is about capitalism. This is the state in modern liberal democracy is not neutral. This is the state is on the side in a big major disputes. The state is on the side of big business, not on the side of ordinary working people. And my last pitch on this about how we're going to do it. We should never ever put our faith in lawyers or public inquiries or politicians or general secretaries. This is about building grassroots and pushing it from the grassroots. And I think that's what we've tried to do. And I think, to be honest, that's the thing we're most proud of, the fact that we have got that out there on the grassroots. It started from the bottom up. It didn't start from the top down.
Well, the grassroots point, I think, is absolutely vital. What I'd like to know is, given that John McDonnell was involved in this from the beginning, certainly in the Blacklist support campaign, Do you think a Labour government would make any difference? This is notwithstanding the importance of building a grassroots movement, actually goes beyond the trade union movement. Would a Labour government make any difference, in your opinion?
Well, we hope so. Otherwise, what's the point? But we hope so. John McDonnell's speaking at our trade union conference on the 16th of November, although now the general election's been called, that might be more difficult for him. And they have made certain promises to us as well about trying to get to the bottom of what went on, justice for the Lawrence family, justice for the Blacklist support group. We would hope that a Labour government, particularly because the shadow front bench, I mean, I know there's some people in the Labour Party, parliamentary party, that I don't think actually are going to be on our side, but the Labour shadow front bench hopefully will be on our side, and the demands that we're putting forward, like the release of the names of the 1,000 organisations that were spied on. We still haven't got it. So really, we know we've been spied on because we've uncovered it ourselves, or in my case, the police spy whistle blew. But we know that there's hundreds of organisations that were spied on, and those people don't know they were spied on. So our demands, we're hoping that a Labour government would concede to, which is release of the organisations that were spied on, release the cover names of the real names of the police spies, democratise and open up the public inquiry so that it is a genuine public inquiry which aims to get at the truth. If you think about it, this public inquiry was opened in 2014, I think, and we don't get the evidence hearings. It was all meant to be wrapped up by now. The evidence hearings are due to start next summer. And that's because of the police, the way the police have frustrated the whole process. So all of the stuff that the police are up to, the anonymity orders that they're asking for police officers, the secret courts, we're hoping that if we get a Labour government, all of that will be pushed aside, the public inquiry will be opened up, and it will be a genuine inquiry where we could hope to get to the bottom of what went on, and get some justice as well from it. But also, one of the key messages actually is that, and it goes back to this point about how we get the message of what we're doing out there and get a mass audience. What we're saying to trade unionists, community activists, is that we're busy campaigning all the time against cuts and austerity and stuff like that. But there is a real issue here about our democratic rights, the rights to protest, the right to be a member of a trade union, the right to be on a picket line, the right to take part in industrial action, the right to be a campaigner and a community activist and not be spied on, not be infiltrated, not have the police attempt to subvert the activities, the democratic activities that you're involved in. So our message is we want to do all of that stuff. We're going to continue to campaign, to fight and do all the things that we do. But linked to that is the campaign around democratic rights, the right to protest, the right to be a member of a union, and all of that free from police infiltration.
Yeah, I'd pretty much say that, do I think a Labour government's going to make a difference to this? My answer is yes, I do, because they're once again not putting any sort of rose-tinted, dewy-eyed belief in politicians handing down, justice or anything like that. But the manifesto has been written primarily by trade unions coming in saying this is what we want in the manifesto. And one of the things that the Labour manifesto is going to say is a public inquiry for blacklisted workers, a standalone, separate public inquiry for blacklisted workers. They've already promised, the Orgreave campaigners during the miners' strike, when there was the mounted police attacked unarmed miners in Orgreave. They've promised a public inquiry for that as well. And I think it's about changing the dynamic. It's about changing the narrative, because if the government starts talking about that and the government starts pushing that kind of stuff, then hopefully we can have some kind of change. I don't, for one moment think that it's purely going to be done by politicians voting in Parliament. Of course not. But it can go a long way to nudging us in the right direction.
And we need to put them under pressure. So if we get a Labour government and they're soft on the issues, or they say, well, hold on a minute, we can't do everything straight away and you've got to wait, we're going to be saying, well, we've waited long enough, actually. The blacklisted workers, I mean, some of them didn't work for 30, 40 years. 2 blacklisted workers, I think the longest ever blacklisted worker in British history, has died. So we're not waiting. So we will put them under pressure. We'll say, you made promises. Labour government's supposed to be our government, particularly when you've got the likes of Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell as part of the government, and therefore we want action on this issue. And the public inquiry will have its evidence hearings next summer, as I said. So, you know, we want to make sure that they're evidence hearings where there's truth, there's honesty, there's not secret cults. We get the cover names, and we'll be putting Labour under pressure to get that.
And I think we can. I think we can win, because when the blacklisting story first came out, there were 10 of us sitting in a room with John McDonnell organised the meeting and didn't book a room in Parliament for us, so we literally had to meet in a corridor with 10 of us sitting around in the corridor. And you know, when it first started off, no one was interested. No, you know, it had a little bit on the telly the day that the blacklist was exposed, and then after that there was literally nothing in the news for about 12 months. And from 10 of us, we said, well, come on, there's got to be a campaign about it, we're going to run it. And we started from the grassroots, and we, you know, the trade unions have come on board, politicians have come on board, lawyers have come on board, the TUC has come on board, the Labour Party has come on board, but not because they just thought it was a good idea, but because we pushed them, because we went and pushed them. And we didn't just rely on them, we did direct action. We went into and occupied the head offices of the big multinational companies who were blacklisting us. We took it to them, and it's only because we dragged it into the media that the politicians and the lawyers and everybody else has had to sit up and take notice. Exactly as was said before, the public inquiry into undercover policing hasn't been given to us because the police have suddenly realised what was going on. It's happened because grassroots activists have found out this. Grassroots researchers have done the researching ourselves, not because the state has given us anything. We've had to fight for it, and, you know, we're going to carry on fighting. And as one of our good friends always says when she sums up her speeches at the end, you know, they spied on the African National Congress, they spied on the suffragettes, they spied on the American Civil Rights Movement, and all of them campaigns won. They spied on us lot, and we're going to win as well.
I think I can sum this up in 3 words. Dare to struggle, dare to win. Thank you both very much.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you. Thank you.